Welcome to the latest installment of Secure Insights, your go-to cybersecurity podcast that dives deep into all aspects of the cyber realm. Originating from NDK Cyber Recruitment, Secure Insights aims to share the rich tapestry of experiences from cyber experts to inspire the future leaders of the industry. And for those looking to advance in their cybersecurity career, we're here to connect you with opportunities across the USA, APAC, and EMEA. Today, we're thrilled to have Ahuja joining us, a distinguished figure hailing from the San Francisco Bay Area and serving as the VP Global Lead Executive Partner at Gartner. Ash brings a wealth of knowledge, having advised and mentored over 180 CISOs worldwide. In our conversation, Ash will share his insights on the emergence of the next wave of CISOs and discuss the essential skills needed to excel at the board level. Let's get started. Welcome, Ash, to our podcast. Ash Ahuja, who works for Gartner as a global VP executive partner. Thanks for coming on, Ash.
Thank you for having me, Nick.
Now, I would have done a little bit of a bio at the beginning of this anyway, so I'm not going to go through what you do at the moment and where you come from. If I hand it over to you and let you cover off your journey and where you've come from and what you're doing now, is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I've had a bit of an unusual start to my career in IT and computers. I got into writing software and coding at the age of 13. And it was while I was in school, I started getting into computers. My dad got me my first home computer. I think it was one of those ZX Spectrums back in the day, which was a British computer, which was my first one. And I started programming on it, learning BASIC, and started building apps just for fun, apps and games. And then I started getting actual projects and getting paid for them around the age of 16. So I was literally writing software for the first piece of software was for a company in the US that was selling planes to airlines in India. And they wanted a product that compares planes and their profitability and the routes they take and cost per seat mile, things like that. So I started my journey as in application development, did tons of that within my own company for a long time. Then around 2000 timeframe is when I got into a job with a company where we were doing a lot of projects which involved a lot of the security aspects. Yeah. So LDAP, directory infrastructure, single sign-on, LDAP, things like that, where my journey into the security side got started. So I was still helping build a lot of products, a lot of corporate products on the application development side, did a lot of enterprise architecture work. And around 99, 2000 timeframe is when I got into security by way of identity access, single sign-on federation. And I spent a fair amount of time, and this was all even before there was a single product for IAM on the market. Like the first product that I think IBM acquired from Access 360 was like 2 years after that. So we were building custom identity solutions, everything was custom code. So we were doing that. And this was for large Fortune 5, Fortune 10 companies that we were working back then. So I did a lot of work in the identity space for a long time, deploying large identity solutions for fairly large corporations, again, in the Fortune 5, Fortune 10 category. Then spent a fair amount of time doing application security because my background was in application development. I understood the developer mindset. I understood how we function, how we work, and really did a lot of work in application security, did a lot of work in security audits and assessments. All of this was in a consulting capacity. Yeah. And so did a lot of those. So went all over the security spectrum doing these audits and assessments and compliance audits, a lot of ethical hacking work as well. And then finally, the last part of my consulting career was more with really helping build the CISO organization for large corporations again. These are the Coca-Cola, BP, GE type organizations where you have a lot of different parts of security that are going on. There's an AppSec group, there's a networking group, there's an endpoint security group, there's a compliance group, there's an IAM group, but it's not a cohesive program under a CISO. So really, how do you get all of these pieces together? It was more like a management consulting type of work. Really, you're trying to get them to build a CISO program, and you're trying to get them to start measuring the effectiveness, start building these teams together and not let them be these silos in the company that are doing something with security, but nobody's responsible for them. So I did a lot of that. Joined Gartner in 2009. So it's been about 15 years. And it's been an interesting journey here as well. Here, when I started, the group that I'm part of is an advisory group that helps CISOs get better at whatever they're doing. So the focus of this group, and it was in a startup model when I first joined Gartner, it didn't exist. So help kick it off, help figure out what is it that CISOs really struggle with, and what kind of help do they need that we can try and provide from a company like Gartner. And what we realized is that there's a big delta between the whole consulting side of the house, which I came from, and there's the whole product side of the house. Typically, CISOs rely on either consulting or product vendors. And both of these business models are very focused on obvious business outcomes, right? Consulting, you want recurring projects and more work. And products always will, even if they say, they'll give you a very well thought out, articulated solution. It always involves their product in the mix, right? Where do CISOs go for an unbiased perspective on how to get better at either strategy, compliance, policy, technology? So that's what we created, and that's what I've been doing and building out here, and also working with a lot of CISOs in the process over the last 15 years.
I noted as well, I think I'm correct in saying that you were one of the first consultants on the ground, weren't you, to start a practice?
Correct. And we call ourselves executive partners. And basically, I was the first one. When I started, I was looking after clients both in the US and in Europe, the only one. And now we have over, I think, 40 at this count that do the same thing. We've grown into EMEA, Australia, Brazil, North America, Canada, of course, and still growing. So it's a pretty vibrant group, one of the fastest growing groups.
Good news. Always good to see. So as part of your roles that you've had then, one of those was, I don't know if it still is, but I think one of the achievements was that you coached and mentored and helped train circa 180 CISOs globally for these huge corporate organizations. Is that still in your remit now? Are you doing that currently?
Half my job is still working with CISOs, and the other part right now as the global role lead is working with our product group, our research, trying to get that to be more effective and more relevant, working with our conferences business, and really helping all the other executive partners to be better at what they do with our clients.
Yeah, and we're really delighted to have you on, because we wanted to talk about the CISO role and the relationship with the board and what a CISO looked like 20 years ago to now. And it's great to have your input, because you've been in this space for so many years now. Do you still get to really see what's happening out there in the landscape and the cybersecurity? What sort of attacks are being commonly made, and how do you help the CISO community in that space?
So yes, it's very. In fact, now I work and live in Silicon Valley, so I have a whole bunch of clients that are in the tech space. I have a whole bunch of security tech companies and their CISOs that I'm working with. So I get a first-hand look at what's going on. I would say currently today, if you ask me, I think there are three areas that are really top of mind for CISOs. One is that no amount of protection investments that they've done over the last 5, 6, 10, 15 years have really worked out as much as they had hoped for. And now the focus is really shifting, I would say, ever since the ransomware pieces started spiking up back like 2 or 3 years back. Most CISOs are still building up their response and recovery capabilities, because they've realized, and that's something that we coach them also on, that yes, definitely don't lose the ball on protecting the organization. And as the organization is getting more and more distributed, it's a whole ecosystem with your third parties and everything, right, that you work with. There's no way you can perfectly protect everything. You need to try and really figure out, when stuff happens, how do you respond and recover from it when it happens? Having good ability to respond and recover is far more critical in today's world than just trying to protect. And something we also see when we look at any kind of a security framework, right? If you look at the NIST CSF framework, which has the protect, detect, monitor, respond, and recover buckets, most people are fairly mature on the first three. I would say protect and detect. Monitor, response, and recover is still where the biggest delta is on where people are and where they want to be. And that's something that we find is key, and it's expensive, right? Who can truly test knocking off their ERP and rebuilding it from scratch? And it's an expensive prospect to even test those capabilities out, which is why most people have avoided them. But now they're realizing we really need to figure out if something does happen to our core systems, like our ERP or something our customers deal with,
Mm.
or something that's revenue generating, if you're a tech company, how do you actually bring it back from scratch? That's where a lot of focus is going on. The other piece is, of course, Gen AI. It's the hot topic, right? Businesses are trying to play with it, do things with it. That's a big part of a CISO's focus these days is two parts, try and get ahead of what the business is trying to do and trying to understand what kind of pilots, projects are they planning to do and what kind of implications there might be. And Gen AI overall is such a new field that even trying to protect it, it's constantly changing. Even what the vendors say, what Microsoft says versus OpenAI says versus what Google says, and what actually you can do and not do. There's a huge amount of daylight in marketing, product, and actual implementation experiences. So that's a big area of focus for a lot of CISOs. And I would say the third one, especially with what is happening with at least in the US, and a lot of countries are following suit, is with the new SEC guidelines around cybersecurity, which is demanding a lot more transparency, a lot more understanding. If you're a tech company or a company that's highly digital, a lot more understanding of the actual product security capabilities. So if you're a company that's doing a lot of product development, need not be a tech company, but if you're a company that's doing a lot of product like medical devices or anything that's where you're building products that are digital, you really need to understand what your product security architecture and product security maturity looks like. That's been something CISOs have ignored for the longest time. And finally, it's getting the attention that it rightly deserves. So I think those three would be the focus areas.
Okay, the new regulations, I was going to ask you about that, so it's quite poignant you bring it up. So do you, in the CISO community, do you think that with these new regulations coming through and tightening up, as you mentioned, do you think there's a little bit of a case of sort of be careful what you wish for if you want to get to the CISO level? And do you think as well that in, say, 3-5 years' time, we're going to have a new landscape of a CISO head of? Do you think it will look different? Because are some of these people going to be avoiding getting to that top job now, thinking, these guidelines are only going to get tighter and tighter. Do I want to put myself in that position? So therefore, I can go in this direction. Do you think that will have an impact?
It will. It will definitely have an impact on their focus. So traditionally, a lot of CISOs have come from an infrastructure security background. They come from firewalls and network security and endpoint security. They don't come from an application development background.
Yeah.
And that's a huge delta for them to truly understand what's happening in the product engineering and application development side. And I have seen I've worked with some that realize that gap, and they realize that that's a space they've not been exposed to, and invest correctly to hire somebody who's truly from the application security world, who can take charge of that and help fill that void. I also meet a lot that still ignore that place, and they feel like, yeah, it's important and I can wing it. And it's a fairly complicated situation. It's not like it used to be where, if you were in a bank or an insurance company and you had corporate development going on internally, you had your own data centers and you had your own tech stack using, Microsoft or Java development going on. It's no longer the case. All development is happening in the cloud now. And you need people who truly understand what does it take to build a cloud native app, either in Google Cloud or Azure or AWS. And those three are fairly intricate, complicated environments. And if you don't understand how these things are being built, a lot of those decisions are being made by developers. How does container management happen? How does load balancing happen? How are we configuring the WAF? How are we configuring all of these pieces in the cloud? Developers are doing it. So if you as a CISO are looking at it from your old school traditional legacy mindset of what about the firewalls? What about this? What about that? You're completely going to miss the point. And that's a big area that I feel a lot of CISOs are not going to make the cut if they either don't realize this is a big gap that they have and want to staff their organizations accordingly. And I think a lot of CISOs that come from the application development background will have a much bigger role to play at the table because they understand both sides of the house, and they can talk the developer talk, they can talk the board talk, they can make sure the SEC regulations say we need to know how are you building these things? What kind of an material impact would we have if, let's say, this product that we have deployed with thousands of customers has a problem like Log4j or something else that's a vulnerability that we need to patch? How are you making sure you're aware of what is going on in there? So between the SEC regulations, between the software bill of materials demands that are coming from all different places, CISOs really need to understand how things are being built at a fairly detailed level. So anybody who's not coming from that background needs to upskill or get people that really are good at it. If you're not doing that, you're going to be short-lived.
And do you see with the huge corporate organizations, thousands and thousands of employees, do you see a combination of CISOs, more than one? And therefore, if that is the case, because there's a few companies that we've spoken that do have that structure at the moment, but I just wonder how that's going to roll into then ultimate responsibility when something happens, and the board relationship and the CIO and the COO, or whatever their reporting mechanism is. How sort of complicated does that get if that does happen?
So I've seen, in fact, that's something we're tracking right now with a few clients that I have, where they have a traditional CISO, then they have a product head of security. It's typically called a chief trust officer or a head of product cybersecurity. And I've seen this in some of the largest companies where it's a typical problem most companies have, where the CIO and the CISO organization tells the development and the product engineering organization to do certain things. And product engineering and software engineering folks are like, we have our own stuff to worry about. We have these things to ship. We have these new features and capabilities to build out. Security things get put on the back burner. So I have seen now this new trend with some of the largest companies where they now have a new organization that sits between product engineering and the enterprise CISO, that their job is essentially to make sure product engineering is doing all of the things that they're supposed to do from a cybersecurity perspective. It's very few that are doing that right now. It's just started, but I see that trend happening more and more, because looking after security for your enterprise applications and enterprise IT applications is one thing. Looking after things that you're shipping out to customers that are running in their product space is a very different thing. So I would say if you're a highly digital company or a tech company, I see this happening more there. If you are a more traditional company, then I think the BISO or that model is working more effectively, where people are hiring BISOs that work in all the different business units to make sure things are being done appropriately, things are being secured appropriately, risk is being managed at the right point. You have your spokesperson there who's helping them do the right thing. So there's a lot of different security models that I think are happening. I know certain very large companies have country CISOs, and it's a similar model where there's a corporate CISO and country CISOs or business unit CISOs. So we get this question a lot, like, what's a good security organization model? And it's like, there is none. Like, you have to really figure out what your maturity is, figure out what biggest business risks are. And that's where you need to have a good amount of focus and attention. And at the same time, you also need to be maturing your entire security program. If you're like a 2.53, you need to keep maturing all of the capabilities as well. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and many good companies restructure their org every year or 2 years, because once they've done a certain thing, now let's focus on something else that's not working.
Yeah. It's something we're seeing actually. So I think it might pick up a bit more pace over the next 12, 18, 24 months or so. Okay, so you've had 20 years also experience in cybersecurity, information security. How does a CISO look today to 20 years ago in industry? What's the difference now?
I think the difference now, in my opinion, they're still working with all the CISOs that I have over the years. I put them in 3 buckets, right? The one bucket of the CISO, which is typically a virtual CISO or a consulting CISO, or the CISOs that move every 1.5 to 2 years from company to company.
Yeah.
They still exist and they're needed, because a lot of companies are still just waking up to the need for having a security office or having a CISO. Even today, we come across companies all the time. So they need they need someone to come in and set the foundation, the policies, the tech stack, the overall security program, charter, get things working, endpoint security, like just get the basics up and running.
Yeah.
So they still are needed and are relevant. But the bulk of the CISOs today are quite different. So the second bucket is people who've done that, but at the same time, they still need to do better at risk management, third-party risk management, working with audit, working with enterprise risk, working with their business partners, working with other business units, really getting entrenched into and building relationships with other people in the business. The challenge that they typically have is that they're still running the security office and the security program. They have a whole bunch of junior technicians and analysts that they're working with. So 80% of their job goes into still just running the security program, the SecOps, firefighting, doing all of that. And 20% of their time is going into extending themselves out to build relationships. So that's where I feel CISOs are now going from what we used to call a doctor no, like, this is what you can and cannot do in security, to now really saying, okay, I need to really enable these businesses to do what they're trying to do. And I need to figure that out, and I need to build my own muscle. These are the people that we work with. So if I ask, so how do you actually make money and what's your margin like as a company? The number of CISOs that can answer that question off the bat, I would say, is less than 15% in the second bucket. And that's really the business acumen that you need to understand and know as you're trying to do better at board reporting, as you're trying to do better at working with your business stakeholders. If you can't articulate what matters to them and speak in their language and help them understand why certain risks that are being taken are a bit too much or too little in their language, you're not going to be effective. So that's where I find most CISOs need help in switching from their comfort zone of the security sandbox, security tools, security vendors, new gizmos that are coming out, to now saying, okay, I've done enough of that. I need help to really try and get with the business, understand what types of things they are talking about, and build my muscle there. So that's the second bucket. The third bucket, which I would say is about 20% of the CISOs right now, are really truly the executive CISOs, the ones who truly have a seat at the table, where the board and the C-suite truly trust them for their input and advice on risks and risk mitigation. And there's some that I work with that literally can even stop certain mergers and acquisitions from going through, because that's how strong a seat at the table they have. Very few CISOs have gotten to that point. So that's the transition that's happening, I feel.
And that's a great segue into the board discussion, because again, that's a really hot topic, and we have weekly discussions with executives in the C-suite level and how this trend is going. And increasingly, it is that gap that the CISO is making, and it is starting to happen, isn't it? There's a lot of consultancies like you guys who offer that executive leadership offering to the CISO community, but it's a completely different animal, isn't it? It's a completely different cap. And like you say, the three buckets, 20% in your opinion, can actually operate effectively at the board. What would you say are the key differences to hold that role, to have a board seat versus the CISO cap as is at the moment?
I think the board of directors really want to understand what is it that is going to be material. Like what are the things that are going to be showstoppers versus what are the things that you are doing in a manner to protect revenue, protect margin, enable customer growth or expansion, right? That's what the board is really trying to figure out and provide governance and guidance on. So the first thing that the CISOs really need to do to wear that cap is to speak in that language. It's the analogy that I give quite often to help people understand that is, when you go for your annual physical checkup and you get like your blood work done, a blood panel done, and you get this report that gives you, like, it's a 5-page report of, your cholesterol and your blood panel and your hormones and your, all the different markers that you have. Each one of them, like even cholesterol, has like 6 other things under it with these little tiny numbers. And you look at it and you're like, okay, doc, what does this mean? What do I do about it? Like, I don't understand any of this. Tell me, what should I do? That's akin to what CISOs do at board meetings today. They go ahead and start presenting all these fancy pie charts, bar charts of things that the board cares nothing about. You're showing things that is essentially your job. And what they're trying to get from you is, okay, so what does that mean? What are you actually telling me? What do we need to do differently? What's the governance decision I need to make Again, take the doctor analogy. Like everybody knows you need to eat healthy and exercise and, not do all the stupid things that people do. Everybody knows that. But the whole point of articulating that from a doctor's perspective is you want to understand, okay, why do I need to do this? Like, what is going to happen if I don't change some of my habits? And at a board level, they're really looking for, so the new SEC regulations are all about a lot more transparency. So that's the focus. But the board, their responsibility to provide governance is you need to give them information in a manner that helps them make better business decisions. If you're telling them how many times you were attacked, how many viruses you blocked, how many people clicked on a phishing link in your phishing test, those are okay for you to run your own shop as a CISO. Those are irrelevant things to talk to the board about. What you need to talk to the board about and be able to articulate to them is, okay, we have this new plant that has just gone offline 3 times because of several outages that we've had. And here's a case where if we don't make sure we have these controls put in place, we do put this additional investment in, because if we don't do that, there are chances that our production line might be shut down for a month, which will have a revenue impact of X million dollars, because that's a likelihood. Is that an okay thing from you, Mr. Board, or board members or the C-suite, whoever you're presenting that to? You have to speak in that language. If you're not speaking in that language, everything else that you're presenting from a security perspective is complete useless information that you're giving. Most CISOs don't see that. I think most CISOs still, in this first and second bucket, stay in their comfort zone. I review at least 2 or 3 slide decks that go to boards every week, typically during board reporting season. And that's where we really try and say, okay, that's fine. Put all of that in the appendix if you need to go down that rabbit hole, which a lot of CISOs have to now, because now boards are hiring these security experts, right? As to say, okay, we don't understand security. Let's get a security expert to sit on the board and let him or her do all the questioning with the CISO, which is also not a great trend in my experience, and we can talk about that. But they really want to try and understand, what is it that's going to be a business showstopper or not, or revenue stopper? And that's what CISOs are having a hard time articulating. So that's what we help. We tell them, how do you build outcome-driven metrics? How do you link them with business KPIs and business KRIs? And how do you talk about supporting infrastructure and what the risk is? And what do you need them to help invest more in, if that's a discussion you need to have? So that's the shift, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly for most CISOs.
Yeah, and it's again, from what we hear, it's more about leaving the CISO sort of cap there and understanding the business, isn't it? The mentality of what business they're in, to talk about the P&L and the consequence of that plant going down for 2-3 days a week, and what that looks like for reputation damage thereafter, and so on. And so you brought that up already, because, and again, we hear this where we speak to people that act as security specialists on the board, experts on the board, and then they face out to the CISO, but they've been brought in to maybe a different industry sector, and they still don't have that understanding, although they're experts. So do you see that not a sort of a lasting model?
I think it's a huge detractor, because most of the people I've seen in those types of roles on boards, they traditionally come from a security vendor of some sort. I've seen a lot of those, and they are, in my opinion, horrible at being on the board, because what happens when one of them comes on the board is, first of all, the board switches off, because now the board is like, okay, we have a security expert, let him or her talk to the person. So the rest of the board members check out. This person tends to prove that they are really smart at what they know in security, but they come from a security vendor typically. And if they come from firewalls or endpoint security or IAM or whatever, right? That's the space they'll grill the CISO on, to say, oh, what about, so how are you doing endpoint? Like, what, have you considered this? Have you considered that? So there's a lot of security talk that goes on, but they take the discussion down a rabbit hole where, again, you're not talking about the business. You're not talking about the business risk. You're not talking about business revenue impact or, outcome impact. So I don't think they're really good at what they're doing right now. I think that's a short-term fix, which is not a good fix. I also see a lot of CISOs wanting to be on the board. Like I have a lot of people that I know that are going through like an NACD certification to actually CISOs wanting to be on the board themselves. And that's another piece that is also not that easy right now, because the board does not want to waste a board seat with only security expertise. They are looking for people who understand. They want governance on all the other things the business needs as well. So they need someone who understands the business, P&L, margins, other board duties, not just somebody who can talk security. So I think there's still a delta. I feel a lot of these 20% CISOs that I was talking about, the ones who have a board seat today that understand the business, understand P&L, understand business risk, as they either retire or try and get onto boards, they'll be the best board members that one can hope for, because they understand the overall program. They don't just understand one slice of a CISO's tech stack, which today's board experts are doing. And I've come across a lot of them. In fact, there's some tech companies that use these board members as their marketing and sales channel, because every time the CISO is presenting them, they're like, hey, have you talked to this company? I'm on their board as well, and their product is really good. And I'm like, this is not your job as a board member to be selling products during that board discussion. But I've heard that multiple times from people that they've been forced to look at certain vendors just by the board member.
Okay, interesting. Do you think that, again, because there was a few reports out over the last 6-12 months, do you think CEOs are starting to do more and take more? I mean, you mentioned, some companies bring in the expert, and then sort of a lot of the board members sort of sit back and go, okay, we've got this sorted, so we can leave it to those guys. Obviously not naming any organization's name here, but we're talking humongous organizations. And once they've had breach and it's hit the fan and it's out there, and they're now the aftermath, and they've had the call, they're having a dinner on a Saturday night with their family, and the calls come in, and it's like, we're under attack. And they go through all the aftermath of the incident. And it's then that the CEOs then close that gap their end with the CISO. And because you've got all the new regulations coming out, there's some of these CEOs were starting to take initiative to say, well, okay, let's look at the industry that we're in, let's look at some of our competitors, let's get together, and every quarter, outside of regulations, let's have open air discussions to see what the landscape's doing. How do we handle that? You might have this happen to you guys. I know we're in competition, but we're here to help on this front, so to speak. Right. So do you see movement from the CEOs from them down at all?
I would say I see it in certain sectors. I think there are a lot of these ISACs that exist in different industry sectors. I see it happening in areas like education. I see it happening in areas like insurance, things like that. I still don't see it happening in highly competitive spaces. The tech industry is one that's under a lot more attack now than before, and does not happen as much in that industry, because I think the tech industry they run on this assumption that all their customers have, which is they know what they're doing. Like, if you're a large tech company, the general assumption is, oh, they got to be the best at this. And the truth cannot be further from that they're good at what they build, but they're not good at everything else that they need to secure to make sure security is there, right? So that's a challenge. I don't see CEOs in the tech industry doing that. I see CEOs in other industries doing that. If you're in manufacturing, yes. If you're in insurance, yes. If you're in healthcare, yes. Not if you're in finance, any kind of financial institution. I don't see that happening in tech. I don't see that happening in many other institutions. In fact, in some industries, I find the CEO is still acting as the gatekeeper between the CISO and the board. Again, if your board is made up of, take the technology industry example, if your board is made up of private equity firms or venture capital firms that have provided funding to you, the CEO is very careful on what you present to them. The very different board makeup on the tech sector versus, let's say, a regular corporate America board, where they're not investors in the company. They're truly board members providing governance. So different board makeups and different politics. In some cases, the CEOs are actually helping enable that discussion and closing the gap between them and the CISO. Certain industries, I know the CISOs have regular bi-weekly meetings with the CEO, separate from their meetings with whoever they report. Reporting structures are also all on the move right now, like changing all the time. A lot of CISOs report to CIOs, but now I'm seeing more and more reporting to the CFO to get them out of IT, more into the chief risk officer. So there's a lot of that happening as well. A lot of CISOs are talking about it right now. A lot of the new SEC regulation, things like that, the CISOs are discussing it. It has still not hit home as much as it needs to with the CEO. There's still a lot of work to be done there.
I might add that the report that I read was of CEOs that had been attacked, then they made the changes, opposed to,
Correct.
prior, which is a lot of the time is the case, isn't it? So, okay, interesting, brilliant take. Really good to talk to you about the CISO community journey, where we're at the moment. And also, I would love to come back in a couple of years, maybe, and have the same conversation to see what everything looks like and where it all ended up and what different changes there are, what AI had impact-wise and all those kind of things. So I really appreciate your input there, Ash, especially from where you sit and your experience around it. We love to ask everybody on our podcast, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give to somebody looking to come into the cybersecurity industry? So whether that's the next generation coming out of schooling and education, degree, whatever, or somebody looking to transfer out of another industry, what would be your biggest piece of go-to?
A couple of things. I think if someone is wanting to get into security and truly go up the CISO ladder and being like a massively effective executive CISO, in that case, I think you really need to understand the business side of the industry you're in, or your customers, if you're in consulting or any other type of work that you're doing in security. You really need to understand the business side of it, because that's where people need help. If you are coming from another industry, let's say if you understand finance, or if you understand insurance, or if you understand an industry vertical really well, in some cases you're better placed to be a more effective CISO, because that's where CISOs struggle. You can hire the security talent, you can hire people that know networks and firewalls and endpoint security, where the biggest struggle people have is really trying to connect the dots between that and the board and that and the business. So I've seen some CISOs that do not come from a technology background. They've just been in the company for a long time. They've worked their way in all these different departments, never been in security. And they're really effective CISOs because they can get someone like us or other folks to help them build a security acumen. But what they really bring to the table is a good understanding of how the company works, what makes us tick, where are all the skeletons buried, how do we make money. That knowledge is huge as far as mitigating risk. If you understand business and if you understand how do you mitigate true risk that's being taken on in the company, then you have a much better hand. A lot of the things that are traditionally done today, I'm sure with AI and Gen AI, a lot of those tasks that are being done by analysts and by security people are going to get more and more transformed with AI and Gen AI as time goes by. So trying to put all your time and effort in learning just the technical pieces is not great. The third piece, if you really want to be technical, I would say getting into something like ethical hacking or something like that, where you again understanding the application layer is huge. Because, and this is a chart I remember I used almost like 15, 16 years ago, even before I joined Gartner. This was a chart that showed that 90% of all security breaches happen at the application layer, but 90% of all investment and security spend goes into the infrastructure layer. So this is something we've been talking about for 15 years, that this is where the biggest gap is. And it's only now that application security, product security is getting more attention than it should have all these years. If that's a space you can truly understand, I think you'll be much better off in the security career overall. And that's
Brilliant.
what they need for successful CISOs, to come from that background, I feel.
And we're hoping that your message will hit a few people to entice them into what's an incredible industry and ever evolving and growing. And even over the last 2, 3, 5 years, we've seen different job verticals coming out into the market. And I think just from our conversation, it's probably quite prudent there's going to be some more new ones over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's a great industry to get into, and we're really appreciative to have people like yourself on just to share your experiences and to talk about some of these varied topics. So yeah, Ash from Gartner, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Good talking to you.